Thank you, Rodney, for the introduction, and thank you all for attending today. It's really an honor to be part of this, and I didn't realize I was the first scientist. Be nice to the scientists now, since you're going to have a few of us coming through, I see on the schedule. It's an exciting opportunity, and I once was able to speak to the Renfrew, or before it was called the Renfrew, Interdisciplinary Colloquium about some of my thoughts related to being a scientist, and I really cherish these opportunities to think a little bit outside of my normal scope of thought and try to be integrative. So I appreciate the opportunity and the challenge. That's an outline of the talks. So top left is insects, and the bottom right is, the top right is basic and applied issues, which I will explain that's relationship to entomology. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about integration that I've been involved in with entomologists and others, and how that pertains to the theme of the head and heart and the wheel that Rodney introduced this series with in September. So these are crops. So I'm an entomologist. I study insects, but the reason I study them is because they're often problematic in settings like this. These crops are negatively affected by herbivores, and it's an economic problem. So I'm an applied biologist. My work is to understand insects so that we can mitigate their impacts on crops. And there's some legumes right there in the bottom right that were mentioned earlier. And when we have wheat, potatoes, and canola there. And these are some of the beautiful organisms that are so devastating. Got some pests of canola, peas, and brassica crops here, all of which I have worked on to different degrees. Some examples of my work include working out how the glandular trichomes on wild tomatoes can kill that caterpillar. And can we then incorporate those genes into cultivated tomatoes and make resistant varieties? I've also been interested in how can we manipulate the phenotype of a plant. This is another legume, peas here. And we can alter the surface of that plant genetically in a way that can enhance biological control, which is suppression of those insects by their natural enemies, by predators. And that leads us to some interesting discovery about the way different species of ladybird beetles, like these shown here, are prepared for their engagement with the environment because they have different kinds of tarsal apparatus that allow them to attach to things. And then if we can understand that, then we can manipulate and potentially undermine their ability to attach to things or enhance it as the case may be in managed ecosystems. We've also made discoveries that allow us to look not only at one of those species, but multiple predators like these shown here, and how they interact and how those interactions themselves are influenced by the plant. So we end up discovering how a single genetic change to a plant can influence the structure and interactions within a whole ecological community associated with that plant, which not only has applied benefit, but is of basic interest, because these kinds of interactions from the gene through the ecosystem hadn't been understood very well until systems like ours, we were able to study systems like ours in more detail. I'm also interested in the interactions between these animals, which are aphids, that transmit viruses to plants. And the interactions are quite exciting because we're discovering that when plants are infected with viruses, they communicate somehow with the aphids. The aphids prefer to feed on the infected plants, and we are working out the mechanisms whereby that happens. So this is important from the standpoint of managing these viruses, and it's also important because this is a frontier of interactions between organisms that hadn't been realized before. That's a field that used to be lentils, was a legume, and now it's devastated by a virus. So what we're doing with those viruses is very important from an applied standpoint. This was just down in Grangeville a few years ago. These are leafcutter ants. They're feeding on coffee. So we're learning more about the host preferences of these animals as a basis for potentially managing the coffee ecosystem to prevent this kind of injury. So I think all that preamble is to indicate that I view myself as an applied scientist, but it happens along the way that we make basic discoveries. That, in fact, the motivation for some of the work becomes the basic curiosity, the curiosity to understand how ecosystems function, how animals and plants interact, discovering mechanisms that had heretofore been unrecognized. And that, in entomology and in my career, I'm happy to say, has been complementary to the applied dimensions of the work. So as an applied scientist who does basic work, I'm sensitive to the dichotomy that sometimes people find exists between basic and applied scientists, which is apparently very ancient. You find places in which applied science is held under much higher esteem than basic science, and you can find it the other way around at different times in history. Socrates says, "Shall we set down astronomy among the subjects of study?" Glaucon, "I think so. To know something about the seasons, the months, the years, is of use for military purposes as well as for agriculture and for navigation." And Socrates is amused to see how afraid you are, lest the people should accuse you of recommending useless studies. Basic science and applied science are, of course, I think most of us can recognize now, complementary. Here's an attempt to render it in the form of a wagon wheel. And in this case, I've made the the spokes, and the whole wheel kind of is fed by those spokes. This is what we call the feedstock model. And for those of us who are interested in basic science and want to get funding for it, we're becoming very practiced at showing the feedstock connection. Well, if we find this basic thing, it's going to be applicable eventually down the line in 5 years or sometime for application. And National Science Foundation and other funding agencies are requiring more and more that our grant proposals show this connection with application in addition to the basic curiosity, the basic questions about functioning nature that might motivate us. This is another model which I think is closer to what I do, and I think closer to what the Academy really does, is that there are basic and applied spokes on this wheel, and they contribute to the integrity of the wheel, that there's cross-fertilization between them. I think entomology is a good example of that. There'd be no such thing as entomology if it weren't for the fact that there are pests out there. We'd be absorbed into biology in a different way. But because insects stand out in their depredations of crops, we are elevated as a discipline. But so that we are strongly motivated by application, but we're also scientists, we're biologists, we're motivated by basic work. This is a good example of an individual entomologist who did both very well. This is C.V. Riley. If you're a graduate student in entomology, you have to know who he is. He's one of the prominent 19th century entomologists, and pictured here are two things that he discovered. One is that yucca plants are pollinated, individual yucca species are pollinated by individual moth species, and that these are bound in coevolutionary interrelationships. An incredibly fruitful natural history discovery that is informing some of the work that's being done very beautifully here at the University of Idaho and Ulla Pelmer's program, for example, studying that system and others like it. The bottom picture shows biological control. That's the Vidalia beetle consuming cottony cushion scale. It's the first instance of biological control, taking an insect, predator from the range of origin of the pest and introducing it into the new environment where it successfully suppresses the pest. So Riley is an example of what entomologists can do. We can contribute to the basic and contribute to the applied equally. So I think maybe what entomologists and other scientists look like is something more like this, where some of the spokes, if these represent individuals, are really doing two things. They're basic and applied within one person. Some of the spokes are basic, some are applied. The whole academy works together through the synthesis that happens within an individual's career and across them. That's ideal. I think it really does happen. And I also think, another point I wanted to make on this, at least it is my impression that whatever color you are as a scientist on this wheel, there's something that inspires you to be a scientist, which is akin to what inspires one of those yellow spokes, the basic scientist. We're all motivated, regardless of how applied our work might be, by the excitement of discovery and by the intellectual devotion to nature that science can be. And through understanding it intellectually, we come to be able to appreciate it and experience awe in a way that we might not be able to if we as scientists didn't explore it through our science. Now I wanted to talk about integration for the second part, because integration is something I do a lot of. As an entomologist, I find myself collaborating with others increasingly, and here are some of the logos of collaborative activities in which I'm involved with scientists in a diversity of disciplines. So some were mentioned in the introduction today. REACH is the Regional Approaches to Climate Change project. Legume Virus Project is about mitigating effects of plant viruses on legumes. The UI NSF IGRD projects are about resilience of human and natural systems interacting. Of course, the environmental science program, broadly cross-cutting on this campus. The Center for Research in Small Populations and Invasive Species at UI, and the Toolbox project where I work with Michael O'Rourke, which involves scientists and philosophers in an effort to understand better how collaboration can occur across disciplines. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about these projects, a couple of them, as background. This is the REACH project, one single slide about the REACH project. What's shown here is a map of this region. You can see parts of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon are included in the region. And what the map shows is on the left are the production zones that we currently that are currently extant in the region, from annual cropping systems to irrigation on the left. On the right, based on downscaled climate models for the region, you see what those zones will look like by 2050. So there are going to be some big changes. And among them, it's hard to see on this projector, but is a large new zone, that dark zone, which will have precipitation and temperature regimes that we haven't experienced here before, that agriculture will have to adapt to. So the REACH project is all about helping with that problem and understanding it, projecting it, and doing it in an interdisciplinary fashion where we have economists, sociologists, cropping system modelers, entomologists, plant pathologists, weed scientists, all working together, educators, extension educators, to produce a coherent project. And Rodney mentioned it's a $2 million project, but it's a $20 million project. There's a zero in there that is making it quite scary for all of us, but exciting. And we've started, we're in our first year of that project. And here's some pictures of the diversity of our landscape in which the project will be executed, or is being executed. And here's a map of the way we've integrated the project. So we have all these different components that must be coordinated. Monitoring and experiments by individuals in different disciplines will be informed and inform a theoretical modeling framework. We'll have an extension dimension and an education, and all of this should be linked through will be linked through a geospatial framework, a way of thinking about the region, and formulating our research questions. I like this picture of our IGERT project, which I've used a few times. This is the first IGERT project. There have been two of these, both of them led by Nilce Bosca Perez here at the University of Idaho. And this is also an interdisciplinary project aimed at addressing serious problems pertaining to the sustainability of our managed ecosystems in the context of landscapes in which we also have ecosystems that require conservation effort. So I can draw all these people as spokes on a wheel, I think, because the students and faculty involved in the IGERT have committed to work in teams. They work in teams that are relatively small, 4 or 5 spokes on a team, and are asked to work collaboratively and closely to the extent that the students, or PhD students, create co-authored dissertation chapters as part of their work. There's an entomologist in there too. So I can't go through all the other projects and the dimensions of them, except to point out that much of the motivation for the work I'm involved in, and much of the motivation for interdisciplinary work, is the need to solve societal problems. That is, the need to address issues that are extremely complex because they involve biological systems and human systems and their interactions. So we are, what about basic and applied then? How does that dichotomy or that continuum work fit into this framework if so many of these projects are applied projects? And I thought I could get some insight on this with the help of the Toolbox project, which we mentioned earlier that Michael O'Rourke is heading up. And one of the things we do, an important thing we do in the Toolbox project, is conduct workshops in which we ask participants who are themselves parts of teams to state their level of agreement with a number of prompts that are designed to probe the philosophical underpinnings of their approach to their science, and then invite those people to the participants in those workshops to have an exchange of those ideas, to share them and to understand them more deeply. Well, the first 3 prompts on the Toolbox worksheet have to do with basic and applied science. So we asked, is the principal value of research, we asked for level of agreement with the statement, the principal value of research stems from its potential application of the knowledge gained. We also ask, cross-disciplinary research is better suited to addressing applied questions than basic questions, and my disciplinary research primarily addresses basic questions. This helps the team understand the perspective that everyone's bringing to this dichotomy of basic versus applied as part of their interactions as a team. So we have access to some data because we've been running a lot of these workshops, and this is some of the data. There's more in the computer, but what this does is give you a profile of 60 responses to question 1. The principal value of science is its application. And here I think we can see what I was alluding to earlier, that although science is certainly a fantastic tool for more deeply understanding nature, by and large we see science as important because of its application. I think it's interesting that this is the same group of people, when asked whether their research addresses basic questions, there's a complete spectrum of views. So our little cross-section of respondents here, although they come down on the side of science for its application, they're really, at least they view themselves as coming from a broad spectrum of applied or basic scientists. And the other question is, cross-disciplinary work is better suited to addressing applied questions. And I was really interested in this response because I just told you, maybe I set up a straw man, that a lot of the impetus, especially on this campus, but most throughout the world on these cross-disciplinary collaborative projects, is about their application. But here, the participants are not agreeing with that really. They see a potential for cross-disciplinary work I would presume, since they don't agree that cross-disciplinary work is better suited for addressing applied questions, they mean to say, in many cases here, they think that cross-disciplinary collaborative work is suitable for working on basic questions. And that fascinates me. I am interested in what are those basic questions. Can we be collaborative and basic at the same time effectively here at University of Idaho and in the academy? And that is going to have to turn out to be a question for this group to discuss and maybe enlighten me a little bit on whether or not some of that's already going on and I don't know about it. But the projects I've been involved in have been strongly driven by their application. Now, how could that basic collaborative work, what would it look like? I think I really enjoyed this book. I don't know if you've read it. Murray Gell-Mann was one of the scientists involved in the development of nuclear weapons, and also he's the person who named the quark, who discovered this minute particle, which was at the time considered to be the fundamental unit of matter. And this book, 1994, was an inspiration to me because one of the points made in the book was that the complexity, which exemplifies these interactions between human and natural systems, this is as fundamental as any quark. This is what happens in the world. And understanding those kinds of complex interactions is basic science. Understanding how human systems and natural systems interact, even if it's not getting at the tiniest fundamental particle, it is fundamental. Nature is complex, and so developing the tools to understand that complexity is important. And as the students in the IGERT project, and we hope in the REACH project, grapple with the complex interdisciplinary questions of their research, they're also developing the foundation for developing a better understanding of what are the basic principles that apply to understand these complex systems. So this I really want to hear about happening at UI. And I think that some of the products of our students will lead them down into the opportunity to contribute to this type of fundamental thinking. Certainly there are places around the country where synthesis that attempts to be fundamental as well as applied is the culture and the mission statement, such as the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, the Santa Fe Institute, and the Resilience Alliance. These groups are interested in understanding fundamental theoretical principles that'll help address broadly some of the complex issues we face. And I also, as a scientist, getting back to what's gratifying about being a scientist, wanted to make another point relevant to, I think, the series. And this is a couple of quotes. One is from Carl Sagan. Skepticism and wonder are the two uneasily cohabiting modes of thought that are central to the scientific method. This underscores for me the personal experience that basic or applied scientist might I be, that that wonder at the natural world is an incredibly important motivator for me, my reason for working. And then Goethe, who had a kind of a different view of what science was in the 19th century than science that was going past him, perhaps, viewing science as an inner path. Science is a discipline that accumulates knowledge of the physical world, but it also is a way of accumulating knowledge about ourselves and about fundamental, our interaction with the world, our place in the world. If we do that intellectually, it's a kind of devotion. So he coins the term Anschauung, wonder through looking carefully at something like this ant. I challenge you to look at that and not have that feeling of wonder that this is an artifice of explainable processes, but it means more than that the longer you look at them. And when I was in Costa Rica, I spent several months looking at ants through a microscope like that, so that's why I'm like I am today. And it was a lovely experience. Every new ant that went under the scope was a wonder to behold. And I deliberately selected an ecological project that I needed to get data on how these ants are distributed through coffee farms and into forests and on transects, but that also required that I look at them closely. So I wonder if this is part of an opportunity. Are we at the stage, as I read in this article recently by Manfred Max Neef, that we know very much, but we understand little? Can we understand more by pursuing activities that encourage us to look with wonder as well as solve problems? And can we address that through broader, more innovative collaborations than we're already doing here at UI? Does anybody know this journal? The name is interesting because it's named after Leonardo da Vinci, who was the Renaissance man, who was a fantastic creative artist and early scientist. So this magazine or journal attempts to provide a venue for art that does science and science that science that informs art and art that informs science in a single journal. It's very interesting. I learned about it at the Beacon launch meeting at Michigan State University, where there's quite a good group of people that are developing their art through contact with the science group there. And we saw a display of Stanley Miller's experiment, which was the experiment that showed the feasibility of early atmospheres producing amino acids in response to atmospheric electrical storms, things like that, producing amino acids from raw materials. Turned out to be wrong, but it did show the principle that, that there is an explanation for the advent of life on Earth, but the artist had taken the apparatus and developed something that was attached to the wall, and you could see the whole thing happening and follow the you could see the sparks inside of these beautiful glass balls, and then you could also see the product, see something happening in the vial. It's not clear anymore. There's some kind of something's actually occurring. So it was art, and it was science, and it was quite beautiful. And the artist said, "Oh, I draw a lot on this journal." I found that it's not at the UI library. I looked for it. I'd like to encourage that, perhaps, with the library staff, to see if we can have one here, if we want to be inspired along these lines, which I think Rodney is asking us and inviting us to think about ways to do that. So another bit that I thought was interesting and related to this, and I don't know if this applies at UI or not, but this was an article that developed or was associated with a session that was at the MLA this January, where Gary was. I don't know if you got to this session or not. I guess it's a huge meeting, and Gary's busy interviewing anyway, but they were asking about non-traditional formats permitted and used in dissertations in English and other language departments. I found it online, but I think it's interesting because we've done a good job with our IGERT, and here at the University of Idaho, collaborative dissertations are allowed. So I'd be very interested to know how we're doing, because if you look at the bottom line there, in English and other language departments, only 1.1% permit collaborative work as part of dissertations. It would seem that we ought to see if we're doing better than that here, and I didn't do the research, I'm sorry. And how much of that kind of collaborative work occurs at the doctoral training level here, not only across scientific disciplines, which I know is getting quite strong and we should be proud of it, but other kinds of collaborations as well. I'd like to hear about that. So, quoting something again from Rodney's initial talk, all the spokes are needed. If all the spokes are needed, I think it would be interesting to talk about how we can get them all involved so they are all needed. And I also think that eventually, or one way of looking at all the spokes are needed is to just forget about the wheel. Because it's the hole in the center of the wheel that makes the wheel what it is. It's that empty space in there. And maybe that's something we also should think about exploring together. Thank you very much.
Questions, Sanford? Just like give you a piece of information. The National Institutes of Health, where they evaluate graduate programs for funding, they call collaborative dissertations the Idaho model.
Wow. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that.
This is really more a comment than a question, but I'm sure it's meant to elicit a response. It seems to me the basis of the questionnaire we proposed is wrongly directed. Because to say that cross-disciplinary work is better a better way to address either applied or basic research, that just seems misguided to me, because the paramount question is what the research question is. And some research questions require highly specialized disciplinary work, and others require interdisciplinary teams to do. So I think that to make any generalization based on such a generalized question is, I wouldn't say without meaning, but it could be interpreted in so many different ways that I don't see how you can deduce anything from that.
Well, we do have people that came down strongly on one side or the other for some reason, you know. And we had people who were right in the middle, and I didn't show the data that says, I don't know, or not applied, which is also an option for people who would react to that prompt the way you have. And that's one of the goals of the toolbox is, in fact, the primary goal, the conceptual goal for it was to get conversations going like the one that would be built off a comment like yours.
Yeah.
And then we realized after the fact, hey, we have some data here too. So let's analyze and see what we can learn about what people are thinking. And it may be that that particular question, like several others on the toolbox, are rather difficult to interpret well. But some of them are better than others. Thank you.
How would you respond to those three questions?
Oh, let's see. I hate to say this, but I've got to have a 3 on the first one because I don't think the primary value of science is its application. But I'm an applied scientist. And number 2, I think that's the one that we were just talking about. No, I disagree entirely. I think that I think that cross-disciplinary research is not best suited for applied. It can be used depending on the question. That's the way I would interpret my answer, which is similar to what you think, actually, but it just results in a 5 for me. And 3 was which one was that? Basic, oh, my career, I'm definitely applied. So well, the answers are something like 3, a 5, and a 5. Gary.
Sandford, would you call that project you described that you saw at the Beacon meeting as a collaborative artwork?
Well, there were 2 people there presenting the piece to us, so I think that they were collaborators. But actually, they were both, I don't know that it was, they were both collaborators, but they were both interested as artists, in incorporating themes from science. So it wasn't a collaboration, what I saw, between a scientist and an artist, which I think is what you want to know. Now,
So do you feel, I mean, from your context, there's an equal openness on both sides, the scientists and the non-scientists, to each other's disciplines? I mean, you probably are familiar with the fact 50 or more years ago, C.P. Snow wrote a book called The Two Cultures,
that's right.
implying that the non-scientists tended to feel science was irrelevant or possibly even plebeian or something, and not part of their daily lives. Do you feel that it's still true, at least true in this country? Because he was speaking of Britain, of course.
I think the 2 cultures, and many more, exist. But I think the 2 cultures exist. And I think there always is a continuum, though, within each culture of individuals who reach out and are interested in cultivating the conversation.
Those are the outliers, right? So I mean, the question is when we come up with funding issues and political issues that deal with science, we see, do you see a different level of expectation or openness on different positions, the scientific, there are those who are looking for, you know, facts and those who believe in something higher than facts?
Could you try to ask that question again, Alan? I'm sorry. It's probably very clear, but
No. So in today's world, we're governed by the people who are non-scientists, obviously. There's going to be people who are the business people, the politicians, you know, the doers or those kinds and so on. In the political arena, there's a number of discussions currently underway dealing with scientific issues like climate change that you're familiar with. And you've probably noticed that there is some areas of resistance to pursuing the story from a scientific perspective, even though it's a scientific topic.
right.
So the question is do you feel that there is communication going on that can be opened up? Do you feel it's only these outliers, these, you know, these unusual people who are making the effort to listen or the effort to talk? Have you come across strategies for communicating, not communicating, for creating dialogues?
Well, we're working on that within the climate change arena because we need to be talking to our stakeholders, to our farmers, to have a more to have a coherent discussion and dialogue about what we're doing and about what their needs are, without having the resistance to our to the science, which is threatening in some ways. It's as we unfold this, it's going to be about generating dialogue. So one has to start from the ground for the conversation has to be openness on both sides. Has to be a willingness to listen, and I think we've heard more about that also in the introductory comments to this series. And give our stakeholders, whether they're politicians or farmers, the opportunity to feel that they contribute to the dialogue equally. Now, there's another part of your question about outliers, and
Well, I'll leave it. I don't
I think it's the hope of the world that these discussions become fruitful and we aren't divided. If science is maligned to the point where it's disregarded in policy, this is extremely dangerous. So it's quite important for us to learn how to
But do you
develop
feel,
these
just to
dialogues.
make it quick, do you feel that they are equally open on both sides to listening to each viewpoint?
I'm hopeful they are.
I have a comment and a question. A comment on this question. It seems to me that you take the two cultures framework and then sort of look at the divide between the two cultures and ask if there's what the attitudes are about residents on the other side of the divide. It seems to me that, at least from my perspective, that within the community of scientists, right, in that culture, there's a growing appreciation for the power of team science and for the need to encourage it across disciplinary lines within that culture, within that broad community. There are certainly groups within that community that reach out across the divide and bring people over. You did this with me, for instance, right? But I mean, so I think there, at least within the scientific community, in my experience, there's quite a few people, there's a growing number of people who are interested in involving folks from the other culture. I think, as a philosopher, though, there still is a deep-seated suspicion within our culture, on the other side, about involvement with the sciences. And this is something that's played out recently in the pages of the Chronicle and several articles and Inside Higher Ed, where philosophers have argued for the need to become more applied, the need to become more involved in collaborative activities with the sciences and with STEM disciplines, and the reaction is huge and negative from the philosophical community. All the, the people who contribute to who comment on these blog posts and these articles from the top 25 or 30 PhD granting institutions in philosophy are almost always negative, right? That this is, you're selling out, you know how it is, what it is. I don't know. I think within the humanities culture, at least as represented by philosophy, those of us who do the kind of work that engages us with, that involves us with entomologists, are regarded still as outliers, and maybe even dangerous outliers. But that's the question for you.
I just wanted to say, hold that, and just before you say it, we heard about the Idaho model today, so I think, Michael, thank you for the Idaho model of philosophy, reaching
Yeah,
out.
thanks for that. That's gonna give me a lot within my community.
Come on, we're proud of it. We're proud of it.
But the question I have for you is what your vision of this collaborative dissertation model might be. I mean, I know the Eigert approach, right? The Idaho model in terms of integrative collaborative dissertations, but your vision, at least as I understood it, involved more than just groups of scientists engaged in collaborative dissertations, but maybe also groups that are comprised of scientists and humanists and artists as well. And
Yeah, that's
so
what
I'm curious if you could maybe say a little bit more about if we were to do something like that, what would it look like?
I don't think there's a member of our Palouse Prairie team here, the students, so I can just go ahead and make up some stuff that they might do. But I think, for example, we've got some artists who portray our Palouse Prairie and have photographed it. I won't name any names but you know some of the beautiful photographs that are available in the farmers market. Could such a person work with a team that's trying to understand what is a resilient remnant of prairie and what the concepts involved are in resilience, and create images that would help convey another sense of resilience through their photography? Could that collaboration be part of somebody's MFA, as well as part of the work of the team, which happens to include an entomologist and a biogeochemist and a restoration ecologist and an economist? That's an example which may never happen, but that's the kind of thing that we could try, couldn't we?
Have you found there to be a funding gap between those engaged primarily in basic science as opposed to those engaged in applied science from private organizations that want to, fund for a specific, reason, application in mind? And if so, does that affect individuals going into these fields and the very course of the field?
Yeah, I think the emphasis on applied work that we can feel in the academy has a lot to do with funding. And of course, private funding is always applied. And there's quite a few people on our campuses who work as part of partnerships with industry where there's a strict application that's we're working on. Our federal agencies fund basic and applied work. Usually when they fund basic work, though, it's in the context of the feedstock model I mentioned. But NIH funds about 45% of their research in NIH is defined as basic research, and the rest applied research for the National Institutes for Health. So I think probably even that basic research these days needs to show that application. So it's a distorter, for sure.
I'm interested also in your response to further clarifying the hub. You spoke wonderfully about wonder being one of those perhaps common languages that can unite both applied area, that wonder. I guess first analysis, some people would probably say, in trying to do collaborative work that bridges various cultures, I don't have any wonder. That hole is already filled with the answers. It's all clear. So if wonder indeed can be a way to transcend differences and bridge cultures, can we find a way in which wonder can be retranslated for other cultures in a way that's compatible for them to allow for this sort of cross-interdisciplinary
That's interesting.
work? I'm looking for languages that transcend the differences. And wonder may be it, but it may be at first analysis a different type of wonder that a scientist is engaged with regard as opposed to a political, religious person.
I hope there's some responses to that.
So can I try to comment on that? I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know, maybe I am wrong about this. I think a lot of scientists, some scientists, really do see wonder as the elements of beauty. It's the complexity that overwhelms us with this sense of, something much greater than ourselves and presses this challenge in front of us to understand even more. Come, look even closer. And the closer we look, the more details we see, the more complexities we see, and the more, by our definition, complexity often is associated with beauty, the more beauty we see. A wall with one color on it is pretty, but a wall with many colors and the right patterns is considered beautiful. And it's the same way with, certainly as, I think, as with life, wouldn't you agree? I mean, those insects can be seen as machines. Those insects can be seen as humorous works of art. Those insects can be seen as functional entities that, who knows what is going on inside of them, that express programs that we only see over time. We don't see in any one moment in time. Those things just are awe-inspiring. I hate to say it, but they're awe-inspiring, I think. And I think sometimes, if we sit in classrooms, students just see lists of facts and strange words they've got to memorize, and it takes a little bit of effort, but you have to show people, you have to stop and say, wait, this is why I'm saying these things to you. Look at the beauty of it. I mean, it's the argument, you can see it, really beautiful book. It's got a leather color, it's been incised with all sorts of things. You can appreciate its beauty without ever opening it, and some people will. But if you open it, there's even more inside. And that's got to be the way we view life. No? I mean, ecosystems or cells in my case.
That was lovely, Alan. That was beautiful. What you said.
Well, let's continue this discussion next week when we have the second of our scientists presenting, James Foster, Professor of Biology and Computer Science, who I think will ask us to think about some of the classics in our tradition as well. So he will certainly be bridging multiple disciplines. So we're looking forward to that. So again, thank you, Sanford.